Nah. Before the world knew him as an untouchable cinematic god, Bruce Lee faced a brutal, closed-door battle that nearly shattered his entire fighting philosophy. His opponent? A 72-year-old ghost of the underground combat scene. What happened in those grueling 20 minutes changed history forever, and almost nobody knows the truth. The year was 1965. And the air inside Thomas Weaver's private athletic club in San Francisco was thick with the scent of old canvas, chalk dust, and ambition. This was not a place for the cameras, nor was it a sanctuary for traditional martial arts forms. Weaver's gym was a gritty, unpolished laboratory where the Bay Area's most dangerous men came to test their mettle away from the public eye. On this particular Tuesday evening, the energy in the room was entirely centered around a young, fiery, and fiercely intelligent martial artist named Bruce Lee. At 24 years old, Bruce was a physical marvel. His muscles were coiled like steel springs under his skin, and he moved with a chaotic, brilliant energy that seemed to defy the laws of physics. He was in the process of dismantling the rigid, classical systems of martial arts, preaching a gospel of water-like adaptability, blistering speed, and explosive power. Sitting on the edge of the boxing ring, Bruce's close confidant, Richard Cole, watched as Bruce effortlessly sparred with 3 local heavyweights. Bruce wasn't just beating them, he was humiliating them with a smile, slipping their heavy punches by fractions of an inch and tapping them with lightning-fast counterstrikes before they even realized they had missed. Among the small crowd of onlookers was Gregory Hayes, a notoriously skeptical combat promoter who had seen every tough guy from New York to California. Hayes leaned against the concrete wall, chewing on an unlit cigar, arms crossed. "He's fast," Hayes muttered to Thomas Weaver, "but speed is a young man's trick. What happens when he gets hit by someone who doesn't flinch?" Weaver just chuckled. "Nobody can hit him, Gregory. You're watching the evolution of fighting right in front of your eyes." But the atmosphere in the gym shifted abruptly. The heavy, reinforced steel door at the back of the facility groaned open, letting in a cold draft of coastal fog. The dull murmur of the gym died down as a solitary figure stepped into the dim light of the overhead industrial bulbs. It was an old man. He wore a tailored but visibly worn tweed suit, leaning heavily on a thick oak walking cane. His hair was stark white, thinned by time, but his posture despite the cane was oddly rigid, like an old oak tree that refused to bend to the wind. His face was a map of deep wrinkles, but it was his hands that told the true story. They were massive, heavily calloused, with knuckles that looked like crushed walnuts. His left ear bore the unmistakable, mangled cartilage of a lifelong grappler. This was Clove Pendleton. To the young fighters in the room, he was just a senior citizen who had taken a wrong turn. But to men like Thomas Weaver and Gregory Hayes, Clove Pendleton was a terrifying ghost. Decades ago, long before televised sports commissions, Clove had been an absolute terror in the illegal bare-knuckle and catch wrestling circuits of the Pacific Northwest and the East Coast. He had fought dock workers, mob enforcers, and traveling carnival wrestlers, famously never losing a match in his prime. He was sentenced to 2 years old now, a relic of a bygone brutal era of pure survival. Clove slowly made his way to the edge of the mats. The rhythmic tapping of his cane echoed in the sudden silence of the gym. Bruce Lee, noticing the shift in the room's energy, paused his sparring. He bounced lightly on the balls of his feet, wiping sweat from his brow, his dark eyes locking onto the elderly intruder. "Mr. Weaver," Clove's voice was a deep, gravelly baritone that commanded instant authority. "You told me you had a dragon in your basement. I came to see if he breathes fire or just blows smoke." Richard Cole scoffed, stepping forward. "Hey, old man, you shouldn't be down here. It's easy to get hurt." Clove didn't even look at Richard. His piercing, pale blue eyes remained locked entirely on Bruce. "Speed," Clove said, leaning his weight onto his cane. "I've been watching you for 5 minutes, son. You rely on youth. You rely on your fast twitch fibers. You think because you can move a hand faster than the eye can see, you have mastered combat. But what happens when you fight a man who doesn't care how fast your hands are?" Bruce Lee, never one to back down from a philosophical or physical challenge, broke into a confident, almost arrogant grin. He stepped closer to the edge of the mat, bowing respectfully but keeping his chin high. "Speed is power, sir. If you can't touch me, you can't hurt me. Water flows around the rock. It doesn't matter how old the rock is." "Water," Clove mused, a dry, humorless smile touching the corners of his lips. "Everyone loves talking about water, but water evaporates when it hits the furnace, son. I am the furnace. I fought men twice your size with twice your power in rooms where only one man was allowed to walk out. You are playing a young man's game." The tension in the gym was suddenly suffocating. Gregory Hayes took the cigar out of his mouth. Thomas Weaver looked nervous, knowing the legendary lethality of Clove Pendleton, even at his advanced age. Bruce stopped bouncing. His demeanor shifted from playful athlete to a deadly serious predator. "Are you challenging me, Mr. Pendleton?" Clove unbuttoned his tweed jacket with slow, deliberate movements. He handed his oak cane to a stunned Richard Cole. Underneath the jacket, the old man was remarkably thick, his barrel chest expanding as he took a deep breath. "I am not challenging you to a fight, Bruce," Clove said calmly, stepping onto the training mat in his dress shoes. "I am challenging your reality. 20 minutes. No rounds. No breaks. No rules. We don't stop until one of us concedes that their philosophy is flawed. You try to break me with your speed. I will try to drown you with my structure." Bruce Lee stripped off his sweat-drenched shirt, revealing a torso of rippling, perfectly defined muscle. He slipped into his signature combat stance, lead hand hovering, feet perfectly spaced, eyes narrowed into terrifying slits. "I accept. But I warn you, sir, I won't hold back just because of your age. If you hold back," Clove whispered, raising his hands into a bizarre, ancient-looking guard, his forearms parallel to the ground, elbows tucked tight to his ribs. "You're going to end up in the hospital." Weaver stepped back, pulling the other students away. The heavy steel door was locked. There were no cameras. There were no referees. Just a legendary 24-year-old innovator at the peak of his athletic prime, and a 72-year-old titan of an forgotten era. Thomas Weaver raised his hand, his voice trembling slightly. "Begin." The moment Weaver's hand dropped, Bruce exploded. He closed the 10-foot gap between them in a fraction of a second, moving with a velocity that made the spectators gasp. Bruce threw a blistering combination, a lightning-fast, low sidekick to Clove's lead knee, instantly followed by a blinding back fist to the temple and a crushing straight right to the solar plexus. It was a single man that would knock out dozens of elite fighters in mere seconds. But the sickening thud of flesh hitting the canvas never came. Instead, a bizarre, rhythmic series of clacks echoed through the gym. Crack, clack, thud. Richard Cole's eyes widened in disbelief. Clove had not retreated. He had not desperately tried to dodge Bruce's blinding speed. Instead, the old man had merely shifted his weight, pivoting his hips perhaps an inch. He lifted his heavy, dress-shod foot, just enough to let Bruce's sidekick glance harmlessly off his shinbone. Simultaneously, Clove raised his thick left forearm. He didn't swat at Bruce's back fist. He simply framed his arm like a steel girder. Bruce's fist slammed into Clove's hardened bone, sending a shockwave of pain up Bruce's own arm. Before Bruce could land the straight right, Clove had stepped into the attack. By moving forward, Clove smothered Bruce's punching range. The devastating straight right ended up being a harmless push against Clove's unyielding chest. Bruce quickly bounced backward, resetting his stance. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. He had hit the old man, yes, but it felt entirely wrong. It felt like punching a load-bearing pillar inside a skyscraper. The kinetic energy of his strikes had vanished, absorbed into Clove's grounded, heavy stance. 1 minute, Clove stated, his breathing perfectly calm, his hands resting in that strange, tight guard. You used a lot of oxygen for that sequence, son. Try again. Bruce's eyes narrowed. He let out his signature, high-pitched kai, a piercing sound meant to startle his opponent, and launched a ferocious flurry of chain punches, his fists blurred, aiming a dozen strikes at Clove's face and chest in the span of 3 seconds. Clove moved with an eerie, terrifying minimalism. He didn't use big blocks. He used micro-movements. He rolled his shoulders, tucked his chin, and used his forearms and elbows to deflect the incoming barrage. To Gregory Hayes and Thomas Weaver, it looked as though Clove was doing nothing at all, merely standing in a storm of fists. But to Bruce, it was a nightmare. Every time he tried to land clean, an elbow was there to meet his knuckles. Every time he tried to strike the body, a heavy forearm crushed down on his wrist, violently disrupting his balance. 5 minutes passed. The pace was relentless. Bruce was throwing everything in his vast arsenal: hook kicks, spinning back kicks, trapping hands, and eye jabs. The gym echoed with the sharp snaps of Bruce's canvas shoes on the mat and his heavy, rhythmic breathing. Sweat was pouring down Bruce's back, pooling at his waistband. Clove Pendleton had barely moved off his center square. He hadn't thrown a single offensive punch yet. He was simply absorbing, redirecting, and suffocating Bruce's space. "You're fighting the air, Bruce." Clove's voice cut through the sound of the scuffle. It was steady, entirely devoid of fatigue. You were spending $100 of energy to inflict 10 cents of damage. Your structure is hollow. Frustrated, Bruce lunged in for a decisive grappling exchange, intending to use his superior leverage to throw the old man to the mat. Bruce grabbed Clove's lapel and sleeve, stepping in for a hip toss. It was the greatest mistake of the evening. The moment Bruce closed the distance, Clove's entire demeanor changed. The passive, defensive shell vanished, replaced by the terrifying, brutal instincts of a master catch wrestler. As Bruce attempted to pivot his hips, Clove immediately dropped his own center of gravity, making himself feel as though he weighed 500 pounds. In a flash of terrifying, unadulterated violence, Clove's massive, calloused hand shot out and gripped the back of Bruce's neck. Bruce felt a crushing pressure, as if a steel vice had clamped onto his spine. Clove didn't try to throw Bruce. He simply ripped Bruce's posture downward, completely breaking the young martial artist's balance. Before Bruce could react, Clove swept his heavy leg behind Bruce's knee and shoved his chest forward. Bruce Lee went flying backward, crashing hard onto the wooden floorboards beneath the thin mat. The impact rattled the windows of the gym. Richard Cole gasped, stepping forward, but Weaver threw an arm out to stop him. "Don't interfere," Weaver commanded, his face pale. Bruce rolled violently to his feet, gasping for breath. The impact had knocked the wind out of him, but his pride was bruised far worse than his ribs. He looked at Clove. The 72-year-old man was standing perfectly still, his breathing slow and rhythmic. There was a single bead of sweat on Clove's temple. "That was it. 10 minutes, Clove announced, his pale eyes burning into Bruce's soul. "Halfway there, your lungs are burning. Your knuckles are bruised. Your legs are heavy. You relied on youth to overwhelm me, but youth has an expiration date. What will you do now, Dragon, when the fire runs out?" Bruce wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. He was exhausted. The adrenaline that usually carried him through his fights was souring, turning into a heavy lactic acid burn in his shoulders. He realized with a sinking feeling of dread that his entire philosophy was failing him. He was water, yes, but Clove wasn't a rock that water could flow around. Clove was a sponge. He was absorbing everything Bruce threw, stealing his energy and using it to exhaust him. For the first time in his life, Bruce Lee hesitated. He didn't bounce. He didn't shuffle. He stood flat-footed, staring at the old man, trying desperately to decode an unbreakable puzzle. "Come on, son," Clove goaded softly, raising his iron-like hands once more. "Don't let an old man wait. Show me what happens when water hits the furnace." With a furious scream, Bruce charged back into the fray, abandoning his flashy techniques and resorting to raw, desperate aggression. The final 10 minutes had begun, and the real battle for Bruce Lee's soul was about to take place. Bruce Lee attacked with a fury that bordered on the terrifying, abandoning the calculated, elusive footwork that had defined the first 10 minutes. He surged forward with pure, unadulterated aggression. He threw a devastating barrage of straight blasts, a rapid-fire sequence of vertical punches aimed squarely at Clove's throat and sternum. The speed was so blinding that Richard Cole, watching from the edge of the mat, could barely track the individual strikes. But Clove Pendleton did not flinch. He did not retreat. Instead, the 72-year-old veteran stepped into the storm. As Bruce's fists rained down, Clove employed a brutal, archaic technique from the forgotten trenches of catch-as-catch-can wrestling. He aggressively snapped his own forehead forward, burying it into the soft hollow of Bruce's collarbone, effectively neutralizing the young fighter's striking distance. At the exact same moment, Clove's massive right hand shot up, bypassing Bruce's rapid punches entirely, and cupped the back of Bruce's skull in a vise-like collar tie. The loud smack of skin on skin echoed off the concrete walls. Before Bruce could pull away, Clove brutally yanked Bruce's head downward, while simultaneously driving a short, devastating uppercut into Bruce's floating ribs. The impact was sickeningly dull. Bruce gasped, his eyes widening in pure shock. The air was violently forced from his lungs. He instinctively tried to spin out of the clinch, a move that would have effortlessly freed him from any standard judo or wrestling hold. But Clove's grip was not a static technique. It was alive. As Bruce spun, Clove seamlessly transitioned his weight, using Bruce's own rotational momentum to wrench the young master's shoulder out of alignment. With a sickening twist of leverage, Clove drove his heavy knee right into the side of Bruce's thigh, a classic dead leg strike. Bruce's leg buckled beneath him. For the second time in less than 12 minutes, the untouchable prodigy crashed to the sweat-stained canvas. Gregory Hayes, the cynical combat promoter, slowly lowered his unlit cigar. His jaw was slack. "I don't believe it," Hayes whispered to Thomas Weaver. "He's dismantling him. He's taking away his space, his oxygen, his balance. The old man is drowning him on dry land." Weaver nodded grimly, his eyes locked on the mat. Clove isn't fighting Bruce's speed. He's fighting Bruce's skeleton. He's attacking his center of gravity before the strike even lands. On the floor, Bruce scrambled backward, tasting the metallic tang of blood in his mouth from a bitten lip. His ribs screamed in protest, and his left leg throbbed with a deep, paralyzing ache. As he pulled himself up, he looked at the wall clock. 12 minutes. 8 minutes remained. 8 minutes felt like an eternity when your opponent was a brick wall that hit back. "You are frustrated, Dragon." Clove's gravelly voice broke through Bruce's ringing ears. The old man hadn't pursued him to the ground. He simply stood there, an immovable monolith, his pale eyes studying Bruce like a scientist examining a failing experiment. "You strike with anger now. Anger is heavy. It makes your shoulders tense. It makes your breathing shallow. You wanted to be water, but you are turning into ice. And ice shatters when it hits the iron. Bruce breathed heavily through his nose, his chest heaving. His ego, usually his invincible armor, was fracturing. Every classical martial arts principle he had studied, every innovative theory he had preached to his students, was being rendered utterly useless by a man who moved with a fraction of his speed but possessed a terrifying mastery of absolute structure and timing. Richard Cole gripped the edge of the mat, his knuckles turning white. "Bruce, stay outside. Don't let him grab you. Use your legs." "Quiet," Thomas Weaver snapped harshly. "This is his test, Richard. Let him take it." Bruce closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. The burning in his lungs was intense, but the burning in his mind was worse. He realized with profound clarity that if he continued to fight his way, he would not only lose this 20-minute challenge, he would be physically destroyed. He was trying to overwhelm a furnace with a bucket of water. The harder he crashed into Clove, the more energy he lost to the old man's superior grounding. If water evaporates when it hits the furnace, Bruce thought to himself, a sudden radical shift taking place in his tactical processing, then I must stop being water. I must become the steam. Minute 14 began. Bruce stepped forward, but something was entirely different. The chaotic, bouncing energy that defined his youthful arrogance was gone. He lowered his stance, squaring his hips slightly more, keeping his feet firmly rooted to the floor. He dropped his hands from their high, flashy guard, adopting a much tighter, more economical posture. He stopped trying to be the fastest man in the room. He decided in that split second to become the most efficient. Club's eyes narrowed. For the first time since the bout began, a flicker of genuine caution crossed the old man's withered face. He recognized the shift. The young dragon had stopped trying to bite and was now coiling to strike. "Better," Clove murmured, and for the first time the old man initiated the attack. Clove lunged forward with surprising explosiveness, closing the distance with a heavy, shuffling step. He threw a wide, looping hook, a dirty boxing technique meant to bypass a guard and violently disrupt equilibrium. Previously, Bruce would have tried to lean back, dodge, and counter with a flurry of 3 or 4 punches. This time he did none of that. Bruce didn't retreat. He didn't block. He intercepted. Moving exactly half an inch off the center line, Bruce allowed Clove's heavy fist to graze harmlessly past his ear. In the same microscopic fraction of a second, utilizing the perfect economy of motion, Bruce fired a single, explosive straight punch directly down the middle. He didn't aim for the head. He aimed for the hollow of Clove's throat, putting the entire kinetic chain of his rooted stance into the strike. Crack. The punch landed flush. It wasn't a knockout blow, but the sheer pinpoint accuracy and the timing of the interception acted like a stick jammed into the spokes of a speeding bicycle. Clove's forward momentum violently collided with the force of Bruce's fist. The 72-year-old Titan choked, his head snapping back. His momentum completely stalled, his balance momentarily shattered. Bruce didn't follow up with a wild combination. He immediately stepped back, resetting his perfect, grounded posture, conserving his energy. He had just executed a concept that would later become the bedrock of his entire fighting philosophy, stopping an attack by attacking the attack itself. The gym fell dead silent. Even Gregory Hayes dropped his cigar on the floor. Clove Pendleton touched his throat, a raspy cough escaping his lips. He looked at his fingers, then looked up at Bruce. The dry, humorless smile returned to the old man's face, but this time it was laced with profound respect. 6 minutes left, son, Clove rasped, settling back into his unbreakable catch-wrestling stance. Let's see if you can keep that fire burning. The final 6 minutes of the bout were not a traditional martial arts exhibition. They were a high-speed, agonizing game of human chess played entirely within the claustrophobic space of a phone booth. Bruce Lee had completely abandoned all pretense of classical form. The wide bouncing stances and flashy snapping kicks that usually dazzled his audiences were gone, replaced by a grim, flat-footed survival instinct. He was no longer thinking about styles or proving his athletic superiority. Operating in a state of pure, brutal pragmatism, he stripped away everything that was unnecessary. Every time Clove Pendleton attempted to impose his crushing will, Bruce used the old man's own mechanical momentum against him. At minute 16, Clove shot in with terrifying suddenness for a low, single-leg takedown. Instead of sprawling backward a defensive reaction that had exhausted his leg muscles earlier, Bruce simply yielded his weight, momentarily dropping his center of gravity to make himself limp. As Clove's calloused grip slipped on the sudden dead weight, Bruce pivoted sharply on his rear foot. He dragged his knee across Clove's jaw in a devastating short arc strike requiring only 6 inches of travel. Clove grunted, blood welling in the creases at the corner of his mouth. Unfazed, the veteran immediately retaliated with a downward heel stomp aimed at Bruce's instep, followed by a stiff arm directly into Bruce's sternum. Previously, this sequence would have shattered Bruce's rhythm. Now Bruce absorbed the blow by hollowing his chest backward by a mere fraction of an inch, perfectly dissipating the kinetic force. In the exact same breath, he trapped Clove's extended arm, secured the thick wrist, and fired an economical backfist straight to the bridge of the old man's nose. The air inside Thomas Weaver's gym crackled with violent electricity. Richard Cole stood frozen, his hands gripping the ropes of the nearby boxing ring, realizing he was witnessing a terrifying evolution. Bruce was taking a severe physical beating, his sculpted torso painted with angry red welts, and his breathing ragged, but his mind had completely adapted to the furnace. Minute 18 approached, and the physical toll on both men was staggering. Clove, sensing the imminent end of the agreed-upon time limit, pushed the pace to an agonizing extreme. Abandoning technical strikes, he bowled forward like a runaway freight train, intent on pinning Bruce against the exposed brick wall of the gym to literally crush the remaining oxygen out of the younger man's lungs. He grabbed Bruce by the waist, locking his hands in a vice-like grip. Bruce hit the wall hard, the rough brick scraping the skin off his shoulder blades. Clove immediately buried his heavy skull under Bruce's chin, pressing all 200 pounds of his grounded weight upward, trying to violently snap Bruce's posture backward. The pain was blinding. Bruce's vision began to narrow with gray static. Economy, Bruce commanded himself, fighting the panic of suffocation. Find the hinge, intercept the intention. He didn't waste energy trying to push Clove's massive chest away. Instead, Bruce snaked both of his hands up into the microscopic space between their bodies. He dug his thumbs directly into the sensitive nerve clusters sitting perfectly on the inside of Clove's collarbones, a ruthless, incredibly painful catch wrestling defense he had just deduced on the fly. With a sharp hiss of breath, Bruce drove his thumbs deep into the nerves while dropping his entire body weight straight down toward the canvas. The blinding pain forced Clove's upper body to flinch backward for just a millisecond. It was barely a flinch, but it was all the space the dragon needed. Bruce instantly slid his hips off the wall, pivoting a sharp 90 degrees. He used Clove's immense forward pressure like a slingshot, sending the old man stumbling heavily forward. Clove caught himself with his massive hands, the impact cracking the plaster covering the brick. Before Clove could turn around, Bruce was already there. He had his forearm pressed tightly against the back of Clove's neck, his other hand pulled back, coiled and ready to deliver a devastating strike to the base of the old man's skull. At the exact same moment, Clove's hand shot backward, his fingers hovering an inch from Bruce's groin in a crippling grip. They froze, a complete, lethal stalemate. "Time," Thomas Weaver yelled, clicking the heavy silver stopwatch. 20 minutes. It's over. "Stand down." Bruce lowered his trembling arm, stepping back until he was supported by his own locked knees. He looked completely shattered. Clove Pendleton slowly turned around, his nose bleeding freely. The cemented decision, his entire world, that would unravel his entire world. Taking a deep, rattling breath, Clove reached out a massive, trembling hand. "You found the steam, kid." Bruce took Club's hand, gripping it firmly. "You almost broke me. My speed was useless against your structure." "Speed is a weapon," Clove wheezed. "But structure is the foundation you build it on. You stopped reacting to me, and you started intercepting me. You started fighting like a survivor." Gregory Hayes stepped onto the mat, his cynical demeanor completely evaporated. "I was dead wrong. I thought you were a gimmick, Lee, but what you just did, I've never seen anything like it." Bruce looked down at his bruised knuckles. The crucible had stripped away his youthful arrogance. Sticking rigidly to one philosophy, even being water, was a fatal trap. "Mr. Weaver," Bruce murmured, "everything I've been teaching is incomplete. I have to find the absolute economy in every single motion." Clove Pendleton picked up his oak cane, giving Bruce one final nod. "The dragon breathes fire. Now go learn how to control the burn." As Clove limped out the heavy steel doors into the San Francisco fog, the men stood in stunned silence. They had just witnessed the secret violent genesis of Jeet Kune. This untold clash between Bruce Lee and Clove Pendleton proves true mastery isn't just about blistering speed. It's about the humility to adapt when your reality shatters. If this hidden chapter of martial arts history captivated you, please hit the like button, share this video with fellow warriors, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible untold stories from the shadows of history. See you in the next video.